Andy, I've only met you for 5 minutes. I met you on the internet, and now you're asking me to come with you to a graveyard. Some people might find that rather strange. What's the story? What's going on?
It's very strange, to be fair, but also very interesting, because where we left you from the gibbet, about 4 years after the gibbet came down in 1830, some strange goings on in this churchyard were noted. The police officers were then informed, they kept a watch, and eventually they discovered that the graves were being robbed of their bodies and, well, just anything that they could get their hands on, really.
So Andy, why was this such a good place?
It was absolutely spot on for the purpose of grave robbing. The gang of grave robbers had rented a house in Mill Pleasant, just down the road, in behind what's now Wilton Street. They had a line going from the rear of that property straight up to the back of the rear of the churchyard here. They also had a straight path down towards the water, and it was an area that no one wanted to go to.
So they could keep an eye on who was being put in here?
They absolutely could, and the gang was really made up of two married couples and one helper. So the job of the wives was to visit the graveyard every day to see who was being buried. Wow. And to find out what they died of.
And of course they'd be quite unsuspected.
Absolutely. And then obviously they would go back and report, you know, which graves were suitable.
And the fact this area had such a bad reputation
absolutely
kept people away.
It did, especially at night when the grave robbing went on.
Yes.
So that they could continue about uninterrupted. So once they'd spotted whichever grave was going to be targeted, they would come in via the rear path and literally just dig up the bodies and take them away.
Now, was this against the law?
It was against the law, but the stealing of a dead body was only a misdemeanor. So if you were caught doing that, it would be a couple of weeks in the Bridewell in prison or a fine.
But I think you said earlier that you couldn't take the dead person's
You cannot,
possessions.
yeah, and that was where the real crime, that became then a felony.
Right.
Which made it a much more serious issue.
So if the deceased was wearing a hat,
and they took that,
you got a problem.
They got a problem.
So what happened then?
So what happened was, on November the 2nd, 1830, there was about 4 burials. There was usually between 2 and 5 a day, actually. But the 2 graves were targeted, they were pinpointed, and one was a gentleman by the name of Thomas Webb, who was 54, and the other one was a young girl by the name of Eliza Hanger, who was only 18. So Eliza Hanger was, as was the norm, was buried in her a shift, and when Thomas Vaughan, who was the leader of the gang, he came along and they took those 2 bodies, and actually Thomas Webb he had died of some disease. He had open wounds and sores all over his body. They were still seeping. But they took the 2 bodies back to Mill Pleasant and wrapped them up and arranged, or I presume were in the middle of arranging their transport back to London to the anatomy schools, when they were caught pretty much red-handed by a chap called Richard Ellis, who was a former Bow Street runner. He was now the, well, I suppose, chief of police, you would say, for Devonport.
So how were they spotted? I mean, how did they know it was them?
So initially what happened was, Thomas Vaughan, even though he was living in Mill Pleasant with his wife, he was paying some undue attention to one of the neighbours' servant girls. So she didn't like this very
Nothing
much.
changes.
No. So she didn't like this very much and decided off her own bat to keep an eye and she noticed that there was some strange comings and goings at odd times of the day. She then informed Mr. Ellis. Mr. Ellis, being a very good copper, he decided to go and have a look for himself to see what was going on, and he recognised Thomas Vaughan almost instantly, because Thomas Vaughan was the leader of a member of the notorious Borough gang, which had robbed many graves over the years, especially in London and around the southeast. So he decided, obviously, Ellis was going to keep a very close eye, and he decided to stake out the churchyard, and he actually set up a brilliant stakeout in the northeast corner of the churchyard.
That would be that way there towards
Molesworth Road, absolutely.
Going up to Stoke Way.
Yeah.
Yes.
He, along with constables Roger Hulse, James Day, and the fantastically named Ambrose Nosworthy, they set up the stakeout in a garden and basically just sat there and waited for something to happen. And sure enough, as soon as it was dark, I mean, it was probably dark quite early, to be fair, because it was November. But yeah, sure enough, before too long, they could hear the sounds of earth and being shoveled, and voices and lanterns and etc. But they didn't do anything. They let them get on with it. They took a note of exactly who was there, where they went, and then a few hours later, they raided the house in Mill Pleasant on the pretext of searching for deserters.
Which is that way, isn't it? Towards Mill Bridge, isn't it?
Wilton. Where are we?
Wilton Street. Yes.
Yes. So down that way. Yeah.
Yes.
And there, lo and behold, were the bodies of Thomas Webb and Eliza Hanger. But crucially, at this point, there was clothes belonging to Eliza Hanger, and obviously that changed then from being a misdemeanor to a much more serious felony, which carried much harsher penalties.
So what happened to them?
So after a massive trial at Exeter, the gang were brought down and they were kept on a prison hulk in the Hammos on captivity. Normally the prisoners on the hulks would be sent into the dockyard to do all the shoveling and other stuff that nobody else wanted to do, but they weren't allowed to come ashore, so obviously they thought they might be attacked or whatever, but they spent all their time on the hulk. Eventually then they were sent to Tasmania, transportation for 7 years, and none of them were ever heard of again.
Now what happened here after that? What did the families of the people think of all this?
Absolutely. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery of the grave robberies, the whole parish obviously was up in arms. People were crowding into the churchyard, desperate to see whether their loved ones were still in the graves, and it was discovered that there was 9 bodies were definitely gone, perhaps as many as 13 or 14, but many more have been interfered with, some minus their heads, and the reason they took the heads, if the body was in a poor condition and it wouldn't last the trip to London, for example, they would just take the head and then they would take the teeth, because the teeth were a very valuable commodity in Georgian England, which were used to make dentures for posh people.
So these bodies were exhumed, then the graves were opened to see who was here and who wasn't here.
Absolutely, yeah.
That would never happen today, would it?
No, it would not, no. The thing about it was we know we know the names of about 5 or 6 of the bodies that were taken. So we know that obviously Thomas Webb and Eliza Hanger. There was another lady called Charity Netting, her body was missing. But also, and this is quite unbelievable in my eyes, the bodies of two boys, there's a William and John Fowle, who'd only a week earlier been murdered by their mother in William Street in Devonport. So their bodies were gone. Yeah,
Horrendous, isn't it?
absolutely terrible. Yeah. So the body snatching gang had no qualms. They had no conscience. They just took whatever they could, and whatever was going to give them a good profit.
Andy, thank you very much. I hope we can do some more videos again soon.
I hope so too, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.